This is an Intellivision controller. It's not bad, but it could be better. This is an Intellivision 2 controller. It's crap. This is a ColecoVision controller. It has nothing to do with this video, but it just goes to show that somebody looked at this and thought, I could make this worse. And this is the Côté Gamers Long Play Intellivision Disc Controller. Let's take a look at where it sits. Welcome to Mike's Gaming Gala. I'm Mike, and today we're looking at the Intellivision Long Play Disc Controller from Côté Gamers. Comes in a really nice box, look great on a shelf. This is their deluxe packaging, as they call it. But the special stuff is inside, so let's take a look. Alright, so this is what comes in the box with your long play controller. Obviously there is the controller itself, as well as additional thumbsticks. You've got a D-pad and a little joystick attachment here. Mine came detached. I don't know if it's supposed to be that way or not. Looks like there used to be some super glue there, but you could super glue that back, no problem. You could also use some acetone to actually melt the plastic and fuse it together. But that's not a big deal, I'll fix that later. There is also this making of booklet that kind of shows their thought process behind everything and the journey they took to get this as a product to you. The controller itself is a bright yellow and brown. You're certainly not going to lose this controller in your room. You'll find it anywhere. It is 3D printed on a filament printer. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are two primary types of printing that you can do at home. One is filament, and the other is resin. With filament printing, you have the advantage of it being comparatively cheap. The printers are cheap, the filament itself is cheap. But you do take a hit in resolution and quality of the print. On the flip side, resin printing gives you a much higher resolution. It actually prints in a vat of liquid resin that then UV cures and gives you a really solid, nice print. The downside of that is it's a little more expensive, as well as there's some post-production required. If you have further interest in 3D printing, a good friend of mine has a YouTube channel that does lots of 3D printing, and he makes movie props and stuff like that. It's DCP FX, and I will link to him in the description. Go check him out. So, this is the filament printing, and as such, you can see there's a little bit of roughness here. And it doesn't feel too bad in the hand. It's actually, they surfaced it really nicely. And on the edge here, I notice mine has a little bit of rippling here. It doesn't feel too bad. It's a little scratchy up here by the screw, but a little bit of sandpaper will fix that. So I'm not overly worried about that. The buttons themselves, they're nice and clicky. They feel good. The disc feels like an Intellivision disc should. And there is this slot here to insert your overlays, which I'll show you later. But yeah, so that's the outside of the controller. Obviously it has a DB9 connector. This is meant for your Intellivision 2 console, but if you are wanting to install this on an Intellivision 1 or Intellivision 3, there is an adapter to make it so that you can plug this into those, and I will show you that as well. On the back, there are 4 Phillips head screws to remove to open it up, and we're going to do that, and I'll come back and we'll take a look at the inside. Okay, now moment of truth. Let's see what we have inside here. All right away I'm seeing two things that I really like. Number one, these are all micro switches, including for the D-pad disc there. Gives you that nice clicky feeling. They should last a long time. Love to see that. I also really like to see in the corners here where the screws go in, they've got these little metal screw posts that allow the machine screws to enter. I was a little worried when I first took a look at this that this would just be 3D printed plastic, because if you're going to be removing this and replacing your D-pad, as they clearly intend for you to be able to do, if this was just 3D printed plastic, these would not last long. They would tear out. So that gives a nice solid connection, something that will last a long time. The point of possible failure is actually going to be on the 3D print up here. So when you screw this back together, you don't want to screw it too tight. Just make it finger tight. And this should last a long time. It's a pretty good quality print. This board, I love this board. And we can take a look at some of the components here. Obviously, all the buttons here are 3D printed, and they just rest on top of these switches, which is fine. They're held in place here. And I don't know if you can see that, but this has actually been printed on a dual extruder. Oh, there's some of the filament coming out. Potential problem with filament printed parts is you'll get that. Again, a little bit of acetone would probably seal that up better. But this has actually been printed on a dual extruding 3D printer, which means that the gray in there, it's not a sticker, it's not painted, it's actually printed in gray filament surrounded by black filament. I really like that. It means that as it wears, if you're, constantly pressing certain buttons and they start to wear, it will retain that symbol, which is actually really nice and not really expected on this. Let's take a look at how the disc works. So it's just got a flat ring here and a ball, and that sits in this cup here. And as you rotate it, at least theoretically, it should operate those micro switches and give you all the directions you need. Looking at the alternative thumbsticks that you could use, this joystick operates in very much the same way as the disc, where you can slide this around, and that feels really good. I actually quite like that. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out connected in some actual gameplay. And then the D-pad has these little teeth. So unlike the joystick and the disc, the D-pad can't rotate. So even though it sits on top of these, it needs to not be able to turn. And what they've decided to do here, actually, let me see if I can pull out this. So what these teeth do here is they actually sit in between the microcontrollers, or the micro switches, and allow you to press them without it spinning around. Now, I have a little bit of concern here because basically, if you're really wrenching on this, that's going to be right on your micro switches. I do have a little bit of concern that all this pressure is right on the micro switches. After lots of play, I could see that working out these solder joints. Again, we'll see how it works with gameplay. One last thing that I should mention about this, which is really cool, is I mentioned this dongle cover. So this dongle cover is basically protects this connection. And if you want to use this as a regular Intellivision controller, you can. You just plug in your DB connector and operate it that way. However, they say in their long play disc controller making of book that there is a dongle that you can plug into second player that attaches to this. It wasn't included in the kit. I don't know if you can get it from their store. I'm going to have to look at that and maybe mention that later in the video. But the idea is, with the original Intellivision controllers, certain games like Tron Deadly Discs is probably the perfect example. You would have your directional pad as you can move around, but then your shooting, you would use your number pad to shoot at different angles. So you could be running left and shooting right, or running right and shooting on a diagonal the other way. The problem with this is, in the original Intellivision controller design, if you're running left and then you hit the right shot button, it would, just for a moment, stop you moving left to input that command. The problem with that is that both the number pad and the D-pad share a connection. So when one is sending a signal, the other one has to stop momentarily before it can resume. A workaround for that is that you can use two controllers. So you can use the D-pad from one controller 1, and you can use the number pad from controller 2, and then you'll have no lag. You can continue running left while you fire right, and you won't stop. What they've done here on the board is they've given you the option to plug in to the player 2 controller and attach it to that dongle. You'll have two wires coming out of this, but basically this one controller will act like two, meaning that these these inputs will go into the player 2 controller port, and your directional pad will go into the player 1 controller port. And therefore you can, as if you were playing with two controllers, run left and shoot right, and you won't stop moving. So that's a really cool addition. I'm sure I could wire up something just myself, but I'll have to check out if they have that dongle separately on their website or not. But yeah, I really like this board. I like the fact that they have the screw posts here. For the most part, I would say that the 3D printing is pretty good. These buttons, maybe not the best, could use a little sanding, which I can do. These square buttons are actually quite good. The disc looks and feels pretty good. The joystick looks and feels pretty good. The D-pad, yeah, it's probably more along the lines of these buttons here. It looks like it could use some smoothing out on the top. But we'll give it a play and we'll see how it works.
Now, before I get to the gameplay footage, I wanted to make a note that when I started to record, I noticed that some of the buttons weren't working well or weren't working consistently. And what I actually discovered was that some of the contacts from the wire had come off of the solder pads when I was looking at the inside of the controller. That is not something that should happen. That's a quality control issue, and if you're having any problems with your controller, you want to look at that. And before people comment that I was too rough with the cable or anything like that, the wires are thin enough that they should break before those solder joints fail. It was just a bad job. I resoldered them. It's a quick, easy fix, but that was an issue I had, and you might have that issue too, so that's something to be aware of. Okay, with that said, we're going to move on and take a look at how the controller works with all three of the D-pad options. The first one being the classic Intellivision disc, and this one I'm going to play with the overlay in there. It fits in there great. It stays in, it's stable, but generally I don't like to play with the overlays, so for the other two D-pads I'm going to remove it. I just prefer it that way because I can hit the buttons on the number pad and kind of feel better where my thumb is sitting. So with this one, I found that the disc, it works. It's definitely functional, but it's not as good as the original Intellivision disc. I find that when I'm trying to do those sweeping motions, sometimes it'll miss one of those micro switches. If you're the type of person who pecks at the disc and like very deliberately presses a direction, you'll probably find this fine. The micro switches do work, the disc works fine. I just wasn't a big fan of how it felt for me. The original Intellivision disc is a little squishier and seems to me to make better contact with the way that it was built. But that is more because the way I play with the disc controller is more of a sweeping motion. I stick my thumb on that disc and I just slide it around. I don't peck at the disc. So you may like it. I didn't like it as much as the original Intellivision controller, but it's certainly functional. Number 2 was the joystick style D-pad, and I really like this one. Freshly super glued, it felt rock solid, and I felt it gave a really good range of movement. The gameplay was really responsive. It felt really nice, and I think that, at least so far, this is what's going to stay on my long play controller. This felt really good. It'd be great for games that require that bit of precision, and I felt that even though I am not a great Tron's Deadly Discs player, that I was able to play better than I usually do with this thumb pad. So this one is a big win for me. And lastly, we have the modern D-pad. I think this is the one that a lot of people have been looking forward to the most, and it feels proper like a D-pad. I really wish that the top of it was a little smoother, to be honest. It felt a little off. It's not bad, but it's responsive. It works well, and it does move in 8 directions. It only makes contact with the 4 micro switches on the circuit board, so you do have a limited range of movement, but it feels right, and it feels the way that modern gamers would expect it to feel. The one big drawback of this is, listen to this sound. Remember when I took apart the controller and I showed you the teeth on the bottom of that D-pad? That's the teeth grinding against the micro switch underneath, and that does not sound good. Might sound better if it wasn't a filament print. I think part of that sound is the micro switch hitting the ridges on the 3D print and grinding. But the way that this is in here, I don't feel good about that sound, and it doesn't sound good when you're playing, which honestly is a little disappointing. So what did I think of the Côté Gamers long play disc controller for the Intellivision? Well, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. There's lots of great things about it, but there are a few things that just keep it from being great. The buttons feel awesome. I love the buttons, they're responsive, they all work well, micro switches are great, and one thing that I forgot to mention was that these buttons on the number pad, they're actually tapered in the corners so that they won't chew up your overlays, which is a really nice thought that they had. The D-pad disappointed me. However, the thumbstick is fantastic. I have a feeling this is the only thing that will ever sit in my long play controller. I'll use this all the time. I really like this, and if you like the feel of a thumbstick, you're gonna like this. Also, if you're just prefer a more classic horizontal controller and you really hate the original Intellivision controllers, this would probably be for you. The disc is functional, the D-pad is functional, the thumbstick is amazing. You'll probably like it. That said, remember I mentioned DCP effects for your 3D printing viewing needs. Well, I contacted Dave, and he has agreed to try to make this the ultimate long play controller. And he's going to see if he can fix that grinding sound that comes from the D-pad, and who knows what else he might do. And if he finds a fix, he said that he'd probably upload it to Thingiverse, and you could print it and slide it into your own long play controller and upgrade yours. So yeah, I do recommend it. It's a good controller. If you're looking for an alternative way to play your Intellivision, it's good. I've got a few concerns, quality control being one of them, but I do enjoy this controller and I will use it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video informative, and if you have an Intellivision 1 or 3 where they do not have the DB connector, you're going to want to see my companion video where I show you how to install a fantastic mod for the long play disc controller that is the adapter that will make your Intellivision 1 able to use these connectors. So please click that subscribe button, click the bell for notifications, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time at Mike's Gaming Gala.